Welcome to Managing Love Intelligently. I'm Jason.
And I'm Stephen Ng, marriage and family therapist.
And today's episode is titled Embracing the Sacred and Profane in Your Partner.
Whoa. You never tell me what these are going to be about beforehand. This is the first I heard of that.
Yep.
And that is an amazing topic.
So a few months ago, earlier this year, you wrote a Psychology Today article about this topic.
Mm-hmm.
And you discussed Carl Jung and the 12 archetypes, and you got into how we're more than one thing, and being in a relationship or a partnership that we're striving for in this idea of managing love intelligently is to find a partner that you could see all these archetypes in them and embrace the fullness of the full human being. So that's kind of what we're talking about today. And also like in relation to the whole Madonna whore complex as well. So we'll get into like all that sort of stuff.
Well, I'm nodding my head and saying, yes, optimistically. Yeah. That's a lot of ground to cover. And it's, most of the stuff that we do talk about most of the time is not so much intellectually challenging for anybody, I think, as much as it is emotionally challenging. And I think today's episode is probably going to be emotionally challenging for a lot of listeners.
Well, strap in for that. And before we kick off the conversation, if you have a question for Steve, you can visit stephening.com and fill out the contact form. At the end of each episode, Steve will answer a listener question. So stay tuned for that. And if the podcast helps you live a happier life, please help spread that happiness by sharing it with your friends and family. So embracing the sacred and profane in your partner. How did you come up with this idea? Was it based off the Madonna whore complex, or like what made you think about this?
To be honest, I'm sure that it comes mostly out of the experience of my own marriage. Because over time, it became apparent to me just how diverse and wonderful my own wife was. But I think the background for my ability to perceive that, frankly, was dealing with the kind of people that I dealt with earlier this morning. It's we do our recordings on a Saturday, and for the last several months, I've been going up to our local jail and helping a client who is awaiting adjudication. And with this particular client, he's struggling with depression, and he was talking about how it's really helped him to be in jail because he's slowed down enough and paying attention enough and not distracted by the everyday woes or cares of this world, so that he's starting to see how really magnificently wonderful almost every human being he's meeting actually is.
Wow.
In their complexity and their diversity, not just diverse from one person to another, but from one moment to another in the life of the same individual. Prior to his incarceration, he's been in jail for many months, going on a year. And prior to his incarceration, he had this black or white, all or nothing sort of thinking about people. They're good people and they're bad people. And the people who have done any time, like in prison or in jail, are bad people. And people who do drugs are bad people. And now he's starting to understand, no, even with that unfortunate experience or circumstance in their life, they're far more complex than that. And so I'm saying this, I think most of us get that experience from parenting, where we see that our children are, wonderful in some ways, but we can also, at least an honest parent can admit that our child is less than perfect in lots of other ways. And I'm not talking about performance on an athletic field or school grades, but inside of each one of us, there are not just two sides, but there are many dimensions to us. And I think part of loving someone is knowing them. And until we really know someone thoroughly, we can't really honestly tell ourselves we love them. And most of us go into parenting with, the idea of this perfect little baby that comes out is just amazing and wonderful. And of course, is everything I ever wanted and dreamed a child could be. But then over time, we find that they're self-centered, or they're stubborn, or obstinate in some way, or maybe they're so quick to make judgments, so hasty, so impulsive in their behavior. And some of that is, of course, immaturity, but some of it is just their nature and their character.
Mm-hmm. And we all have that.
And we all have that. But for a parent, what's unique about that, see, most of us, I think, go through life thinking, when we see that other side of an adult, we think, oh, what a jerk. And then we step away.
That's what we usually, but then the point is to, I think, to see that you have those moments too.
Well, yeah, that too. Well, I don't know about that. Pretty perfect, but to have, of course you're right, and of course this is part of genuine personal growth, because until I can accept that I have my own traits that are highly suspect, like stubbornness or impulsivity or selfishness or naivete, and all of those traits make up part of who I am. And for someone who really knows me, like my close friends or my family, those, I think that's actually part of my personal charm, is that I'm not just one thing, I'm all these other things. And part of accepting me, I think, can we really say we love somebody if we don't accept them for who they are? I don't think that's possible.
Yeah.
And I want to say, in terms of a relationship, at least a relationship that's optional, like boyfriend, girlfriend kind of a thing, accepting someone and even loving someone doesn't mean I have to be with them. I don't have to be in a relationship as a friend or even a committed lover. I don't have to be in a relationship with someone to accept them for who they are. In fact, those are two separate variables that have my accepting them for who they are and my actually being in a committed relationship are two separate conversations. And the one has nothing to do with the other. But to be in a truly loving relationship, of course, I have to accept them. And to accept them, I have to know them. And if I don't see anything negative whatsoever, then for sure I don't really know them, because there are no perfectly moral, perfectly virtuous people on this planet.
I don't know about that. I'm joking. Well, I think some people think that, I think especially in the society is all about, a lot of it is blaming people or saying that this person's evil, this person's bad. And it seems to be kind of amped up in recent years with that sort of virtue signaling in different ways.
That's a really great way to put it. And it's not just virtue signaling from the person doing the broadcasting. A lot of times in our naivete, our relationship naivete, we are guilty of having a reception that's completely picking up on all the virtue, but none of the other darker sides.
Mm-hmm.
And, that brings us to the topic of, well, what do you mean darker sides? And by darker, I don't mean evil. I simply mean the kinds of things we don't trot out proudly and display in front of others, willfully. We kind of keep them on the down low for the most part. Most of us know how to behave in public, or we know that we shouldn't say certain things, in terms of humor or seeking a laugh.
Mm-hmm.
But we do think those things, and we do have those traits that are there. And part of letting someone know me is my letting my guard down and letting them in.
Yeah.
So that brings us to this point where we are all a swirling cauldron of vices and virtues, and together that makes up who we are. And that is also true of everyone we've ever fallen in love with. And the naivete of, the very young and the hopelessly naive or the pathologically naive adult would be to think that when I fall in love with this person in the, narcissistic phase of love, that first 90 to 120 days, their virtue is all that they are. They don't have any dark side whatsoever.
Yeah.
But for the rest of us who have embraced this way of thinking and are waiting for the unveiling, so to speak, the unveiling is actually what makes that person so much more very interesting as a human being. And we are complicated.
Yeah.
We are really complicated. We contain worlds within ourselves in terms of our fears and our anger and our jealousies and all the other things that we're not particularly proud of. So it's an exciting point in a relationship when somebody lets us see that. And it's a make or break position, right?
Yeah.
Because just because I let somebody in doesn't mean at the end of the day they're going to not be overwhelmed. They may be disgusted. They may be very judgmental. They might decide, oh, I don't want that person in my life. So it's hard. And it's especially hard. I want to give a shout out to those who've been influenced by religion, because it's especially hard, I think, for the very religious to let that be normalized. I'm not talking about normalizing approval of these vices I might have, but just at least normalizing that, yeah, this is part of who I am, and if you love me, this is a part of what I'm dealing with in my life.
What is that allows people to either want to leave or stay when they do see that side of the other person?
I think it's different for all of us. And that goes back to that diversity. For some of us, for the extremely wise among us, I think there's a recognition that some people's vices are their dark side, I think is a better word. I think for some of us, the dark side is just too much. And
see it in another person?
No, not just generically in another person, but I mean your particular dark side. Yeah, there's some people who are traumatized by their own past experiences, and the last thing they want to do is be around, let's say, somebody like me who has struggled with being controlling and critical and perfectionistic and a workaholic, and those are all aspects of my own dark side.
Yeah.
And I'm working on them, but I don't know that I'm completely done with those things. I'd like to think someday I will be, but I doubt it. I think there's always some final little vestigial remnants of all of those things in me, and lots of others that I haven't mentioned, but
you're aware of all these things within yourself.
Well, I'm aware of the ones I'm aware of, but I don't know what I don't know, right? I mean, there's going to be something that I maybe not be aware of until I meet just the right person who brings that out in me or confronts me about it. Somebody who's really maybe bold or honest or highly critical in their own right. I don't know what it would be, but I think at my age, I'm 70 now, and for me, I think most of the unveiling has already occurred. Most people have already, voiced their 2 cents on my being and my worth and my defects and all of that.
They told you to your face?
Well, one way or the other, yeah. And for some people, that whole package of my public presentation of self and my dark side, that whole package has been totally acceptable. And those are my friends and my wife who have embraced that side, and they're comfortable with that, and they can, or at least put up with it, right? And then there are others who, for whatever their limitations are, aren't able to love me in that way. And I'm the same way. I really genuinely love almost all of my clients, and I really appreciate them. But every once in a while, I just have to take on this mantle of, I'm a professional. I'm going to do a good job for this person. But wow, I'm really going to be glad when this is over, and they get to move on with their life. And I'm still optimistic that I can pull that off and help an individual with a given problem. But I'm not.
Sometimes they say really quick, those are your teachers.
Yeah. I can see that. And I absolutely agree with that. But I'm not always ready to be taught. I'm not always even capable of being taught. Because why? Well, yeah, we all have our limitations.
And you don't have to surrender? Do you think that you don't have to surrender to that and be like, well, now I have to do this, and then you get down on yourself? You're just like, well, I'm not ready to do that right now.
I like that last sentence, because I'm not ready to do that right now, which doesn't mean I won't be ready tomorrow or sometime in the future. And I think that's a mark of our personal growth, to be able to get there. But I think this is true with anybody in the helping professions, or anybody who's really trying. Oh, frankly, I think it's true with anybody.
I've had it with teaching improv, certain students that are difficult.
Yeah, and you just wish they'd go away.
Yeah.
Right?
And sometimes they do, but
and sometimes they don't.
Sometimes they don't. And then it's just, it's kind of a difficult thing sometimes.
And I really get that. So, it's not like we are all a match made in heaven. But as you say, sometimes these people who are really challenging are our best teachers.
Yeah.
And for my sake, there's been, I have primarily a forensic practice where I work with people who've been accused of terrible crimes. And some of them are post-adjudication and even post-incarceration. And so they're labeled by society as bad people. But some of the very finest people I've met have been those who've been convicted of somewhat heinous crimes. And again, because we're complicated. The tip of the iceberg on the other perspective would be getting put down for being a goody two-shoes. And the sort of person who's always nicey nice, the sort of person who would never offend anybody, the sort of person who's always careful of what they say and what they do. Yeah. And there are those individuals, but even in our attempt to be so compliant with social norms, we put off vast sectors of the general population. So there's really no winning in this thing. It's not like there is a magic code for being perfectly acceptable and lovable by all.
Yeah, that person is the nice goody two-shoes, though they are repressing something, right? I mean,
well, I would be when I try to do that. I absolutely would be, and so are you when you're coaching people in improv. And I think that's one reason personally why I think some professionals really deserve the high fees relative to maybe the general population, at least the general work population, because it is really hard to speak truth that is painful to hear.
About individuals or just
in my mind, I'm sitting in an office with people who have come and opened up their lives to me, and sometimes I have to just think to myself, oh no, this is really going to hurt.
What about you're going to say?
What I'm about to say is really going to hurt.
Yeah.
And if I've been careful in laying a foundation of love and respect, if I'm really feeling those feelings, I get to say, I know you don't know me that well and we haven't worked together that long, but if I'm really going to help you, I think you deserve to know what I'm thinking. And they understand.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like the doctor. I don't think any doctor takes delight in saying, wow, you have a really impressive case of diabetes.
Yeah.
Nobody likes being the bearer of bad news.
Yeah. I remember really quick from the one time when I was with my last girlfriend. So years ago, I said something about
so many years ago.
Yeah. Well, 2.5 now, I think.
Too many.
So early on when I started working with you and doing like marketing stuff and that, and I said something about her saying to me, well, every once in a while you should like yell at me or something. Ouch. And then we left and then you like walked me out. And you're like, hey, that thing you said about that, you're like, that doesn't sound great. And I left. I was like, what do you know, Steve? What do you think you are? Like,
you don't even know me.
You don't even know me. But I knew it. Like I heard it. And it's like, I knew it was true. But then there's still part of you that like wants to deny it. So it's like, That's probably, so I understand how difficult it is to hear something that is true because you blame the truth sayer, that you blame the messenger.
Right, right.
So,
And I think it's, I have had the pleasure of having many clients over the years who are frightfully brilliant, far more intelligent than I, and a genuine pleasure. It's easy for me to love them because, they have so much alacrity in their thinking and so much perceptiveness. However, they're in my office typically because they lack something. There's something going wrong in their life, and it usually turns out to be emotional intelligence. And what's really hard for them to receive is the idea that the basis for rational thinking is an emotional one. And that if they are not truly possessed of a deep inner calm, it's going to be hard for them to reason their way past emotionally troubling truth. And for the really, the person who's really gifted in intelligence, they're used to being the smartest guy in the room all the time, sometimes the smartest guy in their whole life all the time. And there's no contesting it. I mean, I've met those people and they are really gifted. However, the irrational belief would be, well, just because I'm good at X doesn't mean I'm good at all the other letters of the alphabet.
Yeah.
And even if I'm smarter than, say, everybody in my family and my entire life, I've never met anybody smarter than I, that doesn't mean I see all and I know all. So for them, it's really hard to reconcile the emotional distress, the shock, if you will, of being confronted, because usually they're in therapy unwillingly, or if willingly, it's because they've brought someone into my office for me to fix that other person. And when they find out, no, it's actually a relationship issue between the two of you. I mean, after all, it wasn't an arranged marriage. You did pick this person out. And it's like, and take a look at what it was you're so critical of them now, but some of that was attractive to you at the time that you picked them out.
Stop talking, Steve.
Yeah, no, fix them. And so, I'm convinced Edward O. Wilson was so correct when he talked about us being a you species, and that we are, and by you, I mean spelled EU as in euphoria. A eusocial species is one characterized by this tremendous diversity of giftedness, where, I can sit in a group of men and realize each one of us has our own area of expertise. This guy's a mechanic, and this guy's a realtor, and this guy over here is a contractor, and this one over here is, something altogether different. And we all need each other in our society in order for our civilization to go forward. So to realize, that's that first lesson, right? And the glue that binds us together, I've often called love, but I think more accurately it would be called altruism, where at some point we become willing to engage in self-sacrifice for the betterment of others. Like the ant or the bee who throws themselves into the battle to defend others, giving up their own life in the process. And I think for me, my little bit of discomfort repeated throughout the day with client after client after client requires me to say the things I find uncomfortable. And if I'm not, I heard someone say a long time ago, and for the listener, I think this one is worth remembering forever. Education, to be truly educational, must be disturbing. And I think counseling is mostly educational. And sometimes it's, psychoeducational in the extreme, and sometimes it's truly therapy where we've uncovered something deep and hidden within an individual. But whichever way it is, the individual has to learn something in order to do better in their life. And in the learning of these very mostly painful truths, it's that's an act of altruism. Speaking up, and for you, for example, as a single man, to gently and respectfully confront a girlfriend or even a woman you've dated just a few times, about abusive behavior, whether it's her taking abusive behavior and normalizing it or her dishing it out. I think that costs you a little bit, because a date is something we all undertake mostly to have fun and to enjoy ourselves. But as the relationship gets deeper, altruism, or the need to be altruistic, rears its head because, again, it's our nature, and it's a fool who resists nature. Nature is going to be what it is. And as Marcus Aurelius points out, we have our nature as humans, and our nature is really to serve humanity.
Mm-hmm.
So if we are not stepping up at that moment, and instead we're biting our tongue and laughing along with them and carrying the evening to a relatively benign conclusion where everything is all pleasant and nice, we're really not being truly altruistic. And I think it does some violence to us on the inside and to our own nature. And that's why I just so appreciate the diversity and being able to see, what we've been talking about, where there is darkness and there is blinding, wonderful light in each one of us.
Yeah. And you're saying the first step to even getting to that point is by understanding that we're that eusocial species where everybody's needed to, in recognizing that diversity.
Yeah. And some of us are needed in that kind of unexpected way, like the student who is uncomfortable for you, or the client who is like really unpleasant for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't enjoy working with this person. But when I do persevere, I'm fulfilling my own nature. I feel more human at the end of the day. I feel more humbled. And I realize, what a privilege it is to do what I do for a living.
Yeah. And what if people can't even see that step one, and they're like, well, I'm so important in this world. Like, if you have that attitude where it's like nobody else matters, you're never going to be able to have a relationship where you can embrace the sacred and profane in your partner then.
Yeah. So I think that is, the sacred doesn't always come in robes of scarlet and pristine white. The sacred can take on many forms.
And how would you define sacred?
Yeah. Okay. So for me, the sacred would be that which most idealizes the virtues I hold dearest.
All right.
And is so manifesting those virtues that it's really something to be held separate or apart from the rest of my existence. So a woman whose kindness is transcendent compared to my own lack of kindness. And my own selfishness. And I find myself in awe and honored to be in the presence of someone like that, someone who can really, hopefully, teach me how I might be a better person. Or somebody who's courageous. I mean, sometimes we just have to look around and give thanks for these amazing, amazing people in our lives who unexpectedly, by virtue of their own the light living within them, they cast a shadow over our own darkness, and we can see it. I know I'm mixing up my metaphor here, and I'd do a better job if I was writing it out. But sometimes it's just hard to see how dark a certain part of us is until we do meet that person. So the sacred for me, in any case, would be those amazing, wonderful parts that are so valued, and they inspire me and they make me want to be more like that person. Or I can value them and also accepting myself as I do, realize, I'm never going to be that guy.
Yeah.
I just in terms of talent, I've read amazing writers who do such an amazing job in their own books. And as I read, I'm a writer of a sort, and I read some books and I think, yes, this is an amazing piece of literature, and I am never going to write this or anything like it. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But there are other things that are a little closer to, I think, truly sacred, and that would be, people who are truly kind or loving or genuinely altruistic. I had a client last night who drives a tow truck, and normally when calls come in, if they're outside of his domain, of course he doesn't take the job. But he, it was late at night, and this family who were on their vacation had their vehicle break down. They needed a few parts, and they needed a mechanic, and every shop was closed. And he went to the store, bought the parts, showed up, and repaired their vehicle and got them on the road. And that's just altruism.
Yeah.
He really wanted to just go home and crash and be with his own family. But he, he stepped up, and I don't know if I'm that guy. I can't do it in the same way. I'm not as good as a lot of people in a lot of ways. And I accept that. And sometimes it's a challenge I want to step up to. And sometimes I just walk away, not only defeated, but not so much defeated as realizing, that's not my journey. I'm never going to be that brilliant writer who writes this literature that should last for hundreds of years because it's so perfectly constructed.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And how about the profane then? How would you define that? Is that just the complete opposite of that?
Yeah, it's our dark side, right? So, sometimes it's our kinks when we're talking about romance and sexuality, that there are people who like what they like. And I like the phrase one of my friends likes to trot out regularly. He says, I don't kink shame. I'm not going to kink shame anybody, or another client of mine who's very open about his own kinks, and he'll just share them. And he said, I don't turn that down. If somebody wants to do that, I'm more than happy to have a dommy mommy, dominate me and, get her thing going on that. He's more than happy to do that. And I've talked to guys who've been willing to cross-dress if that was what turned on their partner, and that's what their partner wanted. And it's like, okay, let's give this a ride.
So they're really embracing it then.
Those people really are. And because one of my issues would be control, I don't see myself voluntarily doing a lot of the things that people I know, friends and clients and others, that they're willing to take on. Just as, when my divorce became final in my first marriage, I started jumping out of airplanes and scuba diving and all kinds of things.
You were doing this?
Oh, yeah. You look so shocked. Oh my
because
God.
of...
I just, I realized I hadn't been really living my life, and I had a lot of bucket list goals that I had deferred. And so, I'm doing all this wild, crazy stuff. And it was, there were people who would say quite understandably, you'll never get me to jump out of a perfectly good airplane.
Yeah.
And I get it. We're not all identical. And that's part of the wonderful diversity we have in getting to know one another. It's such a pleasure.
And then that profane too, like we talked about Carl Jung in the beginning, he refers to that as the shadow. Is that?
I think that's a fair way to call it. Not evil. I like calling it dark or shadow or something like that, just to identify it. But, for example, the Madonna and the whore. There's this woman who is so embodying of such wonderful human virtues that I absolutely put her on a pedestal and can use the same language people who are in religion use. I can worship her, adore her. And I don't mean that I lose sight of the fact that she's a human being, but, I really am inspired to hold her up. At the same time, the very same woman can embody within herself, that slutty, whorish nature, or at least that nature that people refer to in that way, where she's crazy about having great sex, and she likes to have sex under all kinds of wild, crazy conditions, or not, depending on the person. And for some women, it's just admitting that they really like certain kinds of sex or sex under certain conditions. And, he's really good at this. I've been watching Archer a lot lately. And there's one character who's Cheryl, I think, is one of her names. She has multiple names in the series, but she really is into being choked. And then she wears that freak flag just so proudly, So whenever anybody chokes anybody, or including her, she always gets this sultry look in her eyes, and it's very clear that she's turned on. And I wouldn't call that the Madonna. The Madonna doesn't do that.
Yes,
but the same person who contains that Madonna energy could also contain that other energy that enjoys something the rest of society thinks is highly suspect. So what? We are all like that.
Have you had it to where, because sometimes what happens is the guy looks at the wife, for instance, as the Madonna, and then he can't look at her as the other way. But
and I would say that's a sadly two-dimensional relationship. And for so many people, when they realize, no, the Madonna is more than that, it's like their love crashes and burns, or she worshipped the ground he walked on. He walked in this kingly energy, to use one of Jung's archetypes, but but there's also the outlaw within him, and he also does these dark things, or has these darker thoughts and feelings, and even petty feelings, where she's tempted to maybe correct him, say, that's not right, you shouldn't feel that way. But actually, when we're exposed that way to one another, trotting out the moralizing and the heavy use of the word should, I think, is really self-defeating, because we have an opportunity to see this person for who they really are. And we are all so much more than just one thing.
Have you ever had it, and the guy could also see somebody as the whore and not the Madonna too, so it could be reversed as
Absolutely, where I'm blind to just how magnificent she is and how wonderful she is. And I guess, ultimately we all would hope, at least I would hope, there's a synthesis where, instead of immaturely thinking that the Madonna is the good part and the whore is the bad part, to realize, no, it's about the part that's public or easily exposed versus the part that we tend to be shy about exposing, but they are all part of one person, and that the entire person is lovable.
Have you ever had it to where that, rather than the guy having that issue, where the woman is having an issue to be one or the other?
Oh, absolutely. This is something all of us humans struggle with. For the new girlfriend or the young wife who's not aware that her husband has any defects whatsoever, and then to realize, oops, with every bump in the road, she sees more and more of who he is.
Yeah.
And it really needs, at least ideally, there's enough of a mix of virtue and vice, or that part of them that they do include in their public presentation of self, and that part they keep reserved and only allow out occasionally, that they are both. And for some of us, it's overwhelming, it's too much, and we want to back away. We don't want that person for a friend or for a spouse.
Yeah. Well, I think about people who are religious, like the goody two shoes.
Who are not always religious, right? I can be a goody two shoes.
Yeah, not always. But I think about like a religious person, you're told these things, don't act, dude, you're kind of,
this is bad.
This is bad. Don't be this way. And then
think
that to me seems like you're just repressing that side that's in you and not bringing it out. And so then how do you, if you're like a Christian wife who has like 5 kids and she's happily married, and how does that work with someone like that? Like,
well, are you thinking from the husband's point of view, or are you thinking?
I think from her point of view as well.
Okay, so I know that as a married man or as a married woman, the individual is not supposed to be having affairs. But what if they have a thought or a feeling of attraction to someone else? Should they shut that down and say absolutely not, and maybe even avoid that person? Or, there are all kinds of different ways of repressing that, but I would argue that the best way to manage love intelligently, the best way to manage sexuality intelligently, would be to accept, oh, I do have an attraction for this person. Acting on that impulse would be really out of bounds for me. I don't want to do that. Now, if the feeling, and then but it starts with acceptance of my own nature.
Yeah.
And then once I've accepted that part of my nature, if I find that, oh, the feeling grows stronger and stronger, and I'm more and more attracted to that person, I really need to be willing to take a look at my current marriage and say, is there something missing here? Because happily married people don't routinely get tormented by the idea of being with someone they barely know.
Yeah. Whoa, I think you just hit some people with the truth with that one.
Well, I think it's normal to be attracted, but to be tormented, to get to the point where I just couldn't control myself any longer. I had to act on it.
Yeah.
That's where I'm tormented. And frankly, I think that would be some indicia of starving ourselves emotionally in our own romance.
Mm-hmm.
And before it comes to that, I think we need to be honest with ourselves, perhaps be more honest with our partner. And sometimes we need to go seek professional help and get somebody to help figure this out. But repression, always a useful term in the short run, but never a good lifestyle.
Yeah, but that's hard. I mean, in my last relationship, I had that feeling like you're not getting your needs met. And yeah, I just didn't know even how to do it. I'm like, well, this is normal. Like couples go through this where they're not having sex or they're not talking about things. And I just kind of all normalized it. And then now I understand more how to actually have those conversations or show up more or express myself the way I need to express myself. And if that's not working for me, I know that I have the power to say, that's just not going to work for me, as you would say.
Well, I looked over the shoulder of one of my doctors writing some notes, and he said, the individual is along with a lot of other notes, a well-nourished male and he mentioned my age at the time. And I thought, well-nourished? Is he saying I'm fat? What is he saying here? And I was actually quite emaciated, quite a real skinny person back then.
This is when you were in therapy?
No. It was just a medical exam.
A medical exam, okay.
And the idea that for me, I would agree, I am exceptionally well-nourished. I'm probably a few pounds overweight, or maybe for my body frame, I'm a little bit overweight. I have some fat on me that I didn't used to have. And because of that, and bear with me for this metaphor, because of that, if I skip a meal now and then, or if I go a day or two without food, it's not a freaking emergency. I'm carrying around easily, several weeks worth of survival rations on my skeleton, and I can afford to be without food for a while. But the same metaphor, I think, applies to us emotionally. If I'm in a relationship where I am loved and adored and my emotional needs are getting met, and my partner takes a trip without me, or I without her, or for whatever reason, in sickness and in health, if she's ill and we can't be physically close with one another in terms of sex, that's not a time in my life when I'm going to be starving and jumping ship, and visiting the lady next door who needs help with her plumbing. I am going to be feeling perfectly content because I have an abiding sense of being lovingly nourished, and I have an abiding sense of feeling loved that stays with me all day, throughout the days, throughout the weeks and months. I'm not at the edge of that. So resisting even a beautiful temptation is, for me, relatively easy, and has been for many years.
Yeah.
But it's not, but I don't make a big deal about it if there is some tantalizing opportunity. And that means whether it's, speaking of the sacred and the profane, whether it's greed for more money, I can acknowledge that. I can tell my friends who just won the lottery that I'm green with envy, that I only wish it had been me instead of you. I can say that and laugh about it. because I have an abiding sense of well-being and that I'm taken care of and I'm all right. But there are so many people in relationships who are, by the skin of their teeth, they're just hanging on with their fingernails, and they're like one flirtation away from having an affair with someone.
Yeah.
And that's really, to me, an indicator that you don't really have a satisfying love life.
Mm-hmm.
And by love life, I don't mean sex life. It would include sex life, but a love life that includes being told how wonderful you are, being told that you're loved, being, and I'm not talking about the love languages, which is a complete farce, and was developed really, I think, from a religious perspective. Anybody, if you're capable of receiving love and the other person is transmitting messages of love, whether it's kind deeds or loving remarks or open acts of affection or any other thing, then we're all going to be hoovering up the love that's around us. But if conversely, if you're capable of receiving love and the other person simply isn't giving you any,
Mm-hmm.
well, then it's perfectly normal that you wouldn't be feeling loved. So in terms of the sacred and profane, this is a hard one, because what it means to me is accepting that, part of my dark side is that I can be very needy, right, when it comes to needing love. And part of my partner's dark side in some of these bad relationships might be, yeah, they're really not a loving person.
Yeah.
They are a human-shaped object, but they are very inhumane when it comes to love, or even inhuman when it comes to loving and caring for other people.
Yeah. Would you say that in order to embrace that sacred and profane in your partner, that it starts with accepting that in yourself?
That's interesting. And that's how our brains work a lot, isn't it? But I think it's co-occurring. And so, I would like to see everybody have great social skills before they start dating.
Mm-hmm.
But isn't it true that we learn a lot of our social skills through dating? And so we sometimes make mistakes and we pick a partner after several dates or months of dating, and we settle down and make a commitment only to find out, yeah, that was a mistake. And hopefully our social skills grow, our intimacy skills grow through these failures, and we get better and better. It's the same, I think, with spiritually, talking about the sacred and the profane, or the sacred and the dark sides of who we are sexually and in terms of romance. A lot of it is, for me, not out and out evil. Myself, I don't believe in the concept of evil. I don't think it's helpful in terms of describing humanity at all. But I can tell you right now, I am not particularly sentimental, and I almost never think of thoughtful dates, including anniversaries and birthdays and things like that. I am more than willing to engage with any celebratory activity my wife would like to experience. I will gladly take her out anywhere and step up to the pay window and, pay for the evening or whatever it is we're doing. I just don't think that way. I'm not thoughtful that way. My wife accepts that as part of me. I mean, I've occasionally over the last many decades, I've surprised everyone by doing something thoughtful that way. But in the main, I'm really not that guy.
And you don't try to be that guy?
I've given up. I've completely given up.
Have you tried though?
Yeah, here and there, and it's just not my nature.
It's just not.
It's not who I am.
But you would say to people, if they do have that you don't have to you don't have to be this thing, or you seem like you cut yourself slack.
Yeah, I'm pretty easygoing on myself. I'm very accepting of that because, and part of that, why I'm so happy with who I am, is because I have acceptance from my partner who says, "Oh, that's okay. I take care of that. I've got that covered."
All right.
And she says, "What you do, on the other hand, what you are willing to do actually works better for me. I am happy to say I love you multiple times through the day. I'm in a heartfelt manner. I'm happy to report, yeah, you're still beautiful." And if she changes her clothes, I'm going to go, wow, I thought you were beautiful before, but now I really know.
Uh-huh.
And, and it just, I'm really comfortable with expressing love in a lot of different ways. But for a lot of women, I am well aware that I am a very defective person. That's how that would be their perception of it, right?
Yeah.
That he's thoughtless. He never takes me out for my anniversary. He never does anything. But it's for my wife, I'm perfect.
Yeah. That's
so
nice.
it really goes to the intentional interview,
Mhm.
finding somebody who's right for us, but it also goes to each of us and our individual capacity to experience love when it's being offered rather than dismissing it because it wasn't offered in the way that we prefer or it wasn't offered in a way we find meaningful. For some, the old joke about some Jewish or some Italian mothers is food is love. And every one of us has some formula for what is love. But really, at the end of the day, only love is love. Food is not love. Buying things for another person is not love. Really, the only thing that matters is love itself. And that is that very intense and warming, positive regard we have for each other when we are in love. And if you're not getting that, it doesn't matter how many nice anniversary gifts you get bought, and it doesn't matter how often you get taken out, because only love is love. So when we're talking about the sacred and profane, finding that person who can see value in me, even if I don't go around bragging about how thoughtless I am when it comes to anniversaries, but once found out and once discovered, and now I'm pretty open about it with anybody because my wife has encouraged me just to be myself. Once we're really free to be ourselves with someone, if we're not with the right person, we're not with the right person, and to just accept that and to be okay with that. And after you examine yourself, it's sort of like me. I can accept that there are writers who are just artistic masters, and I'm not even inspired to remotely be like them.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if I was born that way, but I don't think that's how that kind of mastery happens. And it's the same with gift giving and anniversary observances and all the other activities we humans do. Like, there's so many wives I know who are so disappointed that their husband doesn't work on their cars or wash their cars.
Yeah.
And so many men out there who are just so disappointed their wife doesn't want to cook. And if that's your issue, if that's a big one and you can't get past that, I would say you're probably with the wrong person.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you can accept that, but your partner is wonderful, even if they don't do those things, and what they do bring to the table really works for you, well then, okay, now we've got something.
Cool. Well, that's a good place to stop. So we'll wrap up with a listener question. And if you have a question for Steve, you can visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. This week's question is, hi, Dr. Ing. My husband and I pretend that we have a great marriage to our kids, to our extended family, and to our friends. By looking at our Facebook posts, you'd think we have it all. But privately, we are totally disconnected and without intimacy. My husband is so competitive with his siblings and others that he needs to look like he's winning the game of life. But I am exhausted, miserable, and lonely. I secretly read a book called Married to a Narcissistic Husband, and now I am scared to talk to a divorce lawyer because of how dangerous it could become. Because you work with a lot of male clients, I assume you've seen this before, and I'm wondering what you advise.
Well, if you can get your husband to take more vitamin D, that'll take care of that. No, there is no fixing that. That's such a, those of us who are on the outside looking in at somebody who has maybe, if not narcissistic tendencies, which I think many of us men have, many people have, I think to have a diagnosis of narcissism, which I think is fair in this case, the way she's describing her husband, there's no outsider who can fix that unless the individual, meaning her husband, wants help and is determined to change. So, I really have a lot of compassion for this lady, because to feel as lonely as she feels and to feel as disconnected as she feels, I've experienced that, and I think those of us who have know just how utterly miserable that is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she's quite right to be afraid of going to a divorce attorney, and quite right to be afraid of going to a therapist, because she's carefully constructed a scaffolding that holds her world together as best she can, with paper clips and bubble gum, but it's really unstable. But right now it's stably unstable. So she's got, if she desires to perpetuate this, then she needs to not do anything different, because he's not going to do anything different. But if she ever desires to actually have a life, then she's a life worth living, at least. She's going to have to, face her fears and make a move. And she could start ethically with, confronting her husband and saying, we need to go to counseling. The next move, when he says no, absolutely not, is to go to counseling on her own. And the next move after that is to do with whatever truth is revealed in your exploration of yourself and your relationship, act on that and move on. Whether it's making your peace with it being as good as it is, or staying in the relationship but spending a lot more time with your personal trainer and the Filipino pool boy, or whatever it's going to be. My concern is for the children, and not just the children, but I think as a parent, she's obviously very concerned about her children.
Mm-hmm.
And the lesson that she's leaving her children is be passive, don't take care of yourself, sustain misery, and don't do anything about it. And that's not a legacy any of us really want to leave our children. And to be looking at that and realizing the very thing you're doing to try to protect your children is really undermining them and setting them up for even worse failure in their futures.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for that question, listener. And thanks as always, Steve. It was a really great conversation. I just thought this topic was a great topic, and I think it's such an important thing for couples to embrace if they want to have the full a partnership that has all the benefits. I
Agreed. You're not going to catch me arguing with that. So. That sounds great.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Bye now.